Members, it's the appointed time and we have a quorum. We will continue to deliberate the third round of the Anti-Epidemic Fund and other emergency measures. The morning session will end at 1 p.m., while the afternoon session will last from 2:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. If members have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest on the items to be discussed today, please disclose the nature of such interest before you speak according to Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure. I also call to members' attention voting arrangements in case of direct pecuniary interest under Rule 84. We are deliberating FCR 2020-2171. This item invites members to approve an increase in commitment by $5.4 billion and the creation of a new commitment of $8.4413 billion under Head 37, Subhead 700 for Procurement and Administration of Vaccines Against the Epidemic, and under Head 140, a supplementary provision of $2.019 billion to support the Hospital Authority, and a new commitment of $103.8 million for setting up a designated fund to implement a special support scheme to provide subsidized consultation sessions at the University of Hong Kong Shenzhen Hospital for HA's chronic disease patients, and an increase in commitment to $1.259 billion to meet the increase in demand for short-term food assistance, and extension of the special scheme of assistance to the unemployed under the CSSA for 6 months. With us today, we have the Chief Secretary for Administration, various secretaries and their teams. Members waiting to speak, please press the request to speak button. Before we finished last week, Ms. Elvin Yang only used 1 minute and 58 seconds for his round, so I would give him another minute or two. The administration could not provide the figures I requested, so I'd like to ask follow-up questions. So I will speak for a minute or so. Thank you. Last week I asked about the scheme to deliver medicine. As of now, I'd like to know the number of beneficiaries so far. Home Affairs Bureau, Social Welfare Department, please. Ms. Pang, Assistant Director. We have no figures on the number of beneficiaries. We only know the number of attendants. As of the 23rd of September, we served a total of 22,000 people. According to the paper, the expected number of beneficiaries is about 28,000. I'd like to know where that number came from, because there's a shortfall of about 6,000. At the HAU Shenzhen Hospital, you are providing a new commitment of $103.8 million, but according to the relevant figures, you are providing a subsidy of about $5,000 per person, but for walk-in patients, they pay about $2,000 for about 7 days of medical attention and drugs, and there's a substantial difference, and I'd like to know the reason why. And the number of beneficiaries is about 6,000 short of the expected number. Can you explain that, please? Ms. Pang. I would invite the FHB to address that. Dr. Koh from the Hospital Authority, please. Good morning. We hope to provide a subsidy for the existing chronic disease patients of the HA. So if they run into difficulties returning to Hong Kong for treatment, we hope to provide them with another option of treatment at the HAU Shenzhen Hospital. And the consultations or the scheduled consultations they receive there would be different from those in Hong Kong. So we do not recommend complicated procedures or treatment at the Shenzhen hospital. For the specialist outpatient services of the Shenzhen hospital, normally they would charge a consultation fee, but according to Dr. Lo Chengmao, each consultation would cost about $400. Most patients would visit every 1 to 2 months. In other words, they would have to make about 5 trips in total. During the meantime, we are still discussing the operational details with the Shenzhen hospital. We intend to set a cap for each patient. For example, about $2,000 for 5 consultations, but the situation would depend on the actual specialty. For example, for the oncology or psychiatric specialty, there could be different arrangements, but our intention is to impose a cap of $1,000 or $2,000, which can provide for 4 or 5 consultation sessions, and this can cater for most patients. However, we would not recommend complicated procedures or interventional procedures. If we impose a cap of about $2,000, and we came up with the sum based on this estimate. Next, Mr. Vincent Chang. Speaking for the third time, 3 minutes. We certainly support the procurement of vaccines, but in the coming months, I wonder where we will go in terms of our anti-epidemic efforts. We saw 2 cases of unknown origin yesterday, and the situation seems to be fluctuating. You intend to carry out further testing at residential care homes for the elderly. For the universal testing program earlier, it was a great success, and we managed to dig out all the undiagnosed cases or the cases of unknown origin. In the coming months, what more will the government do? In terms of testing volume, would you extend the testing to premises beyond the RCHEs? You seem to be, before you seem to be testing some 100,000 people per day. Are you going to do even more than distributing specimen bottles for an hour in the morning? Are you going to do more in other facilities such as public markets? Professor Chan. Testing is certainly key to our work. We just completed the Universal Community Testing Program. The Department of Health and HA would carry out regular testing, and this is something that would continue. Secondly, we carry out targeted testing in our community. For instance, for staff working at RCHEs, in wet markets, etc. Different policy bureaus are constantly introducing new target groups, and some of them would be repeatedly tested. For example, RCHEs, certain drivers, etc. If we see outbreaks, the Center for Health Protection of the DH would distribute specimen bottles. But with new private testing capacity, if we require testing on an urgent basis, we will procure private testing capacity if necessary to facilitate our work. Finally, At ordinary outpatient clinics of the HA, specimen bottles are given out at 46 clinics for people who wish to be tested. Mr. Chang? How many tests do you carry out every day on the targeted groups? Up to 5,000. Is that how much you are testing right now? I don't have the number in hand, but we can reach as much as 5,000 tests per day, and our public capacity is up to 7,000 per day. Mr. Peter Chiu speaking for the third time. 3 minutes. In the first 3 rounds, a lot of funds were provided to support the sectors. But some sectors were still not included, including the wholesale trade, and the retail trade has not been covered this time. I'd like you to explain why. In terms of rents, we have been asking for support from the chief executive all along. Over the past year or so, their business has suffered, and many companies are on the verge. In terms of the cross-boundary health code system, how can we resume the border connections with the mainland and Macau as soon as possible? Some sectors have not been included in the latest round, and it was the same for the second round as well, because we take a targeted approach out of public finance considerations. This time we are focusing on scheduled premises who were ordered to close or limit their operating hours, and we are providing targeted support to this group. So it is not possible to include every sector or industry. But if we have leftover money in any of our funds, we would try to provide as much support as possible. But of course, it will depend on the number of or the amount of resources. So our approach is targeted. We want to benefit as many people as possible. And indeed, rents is an issue for many enterprises. For government-owned premises, we would provide waiver to enterprises if they were ordered to close, and in some cases a 75% concession is provided for the water, gas tariffs, etc. We will provide 2 extra quarters of concessions. We also urge the Airport Authority, Science Park, Cyberport, Housing Authority, and Housing Society to provide almost $1 billion in rent concessions. In terms of our borders, once the epidemic eases, all along we have been communicating with Macau. Technically, we're ready. So long as the epidemic eases, we would get things done. Next, Ms. Starry Lee speaking for the second time. 4 minutes. Chairman, I'd like to know when the health code system can be implemented. We are discussing the third round of the AEF. Once the epidemic eases, our economy can recover. And one of the ways of facilitating that is to gradually ease the border control through the health code system. We have been talking about this system for a long time, and I believe the epidemic is now stable. We are days from October the 1st, which is the National Day celebration. Many people are eager to see something happen before that. And once that happens, the cost of testing would become an issue. Many people ask whether the government can provide a testing arrangement by charging a small fee of less than $100 so that people can receive tests, and in turn the health code system, for those with business needs, they can receive a test in a private institution. But a lot of people are concerned that without affordable testing, even if the health code system is implemented, they could not benefit. Is this something the government can consider? I think the health code system is essential, so you cannot dodge the issue. Would you consider that?
Thank you, Ms. Lee. The first question, we are also very eager to do that. In July, we took a multi-pronged approach. Is there a chance for that to happen before the 1st of October? The second question, would the government provide subsidies for citizens to have testing at a lower price to have the health code? I don't think it is very likely that we can open the border by the 1st of October. What about November? We are striving to open the border once things settle down. We are liaising with Macau and Guangdong. The three administrations have been working together to control the epidemic, so we are striving to do that. And about the fee for testing, I think you have a point. We will study how we can lower the price, because there are grassroots people who like to reunite with their families. But this is an urgent matter, Secretary. You said you would push to open the border as soon as possible, but can you step it up? Maybe we cannot do that by November. If we don't have the health code and a lower price for testing, then grassroots people will have a lot of grievances. If they cannot afford $1,000 or $2,000 for a test. If there is a health code, you need to provide tests at lower price as well. Can't the administration provide a subsidized testing plan? I will study into it. So what about the timetable? We want to do that at the same time when the health code is in place. Can you give us an answer in a week? We will take the question back and study it in depth, and we will give you an answer as soon as possible. And you said you will do that when the situation is easing. Is there an indicator for that? Now the situation is easing out. However, we need the administrations in Guangdong to have confidence as well. So what we have to do is to prevent spreading the virus. We need to keep personal hygiene. Everyone has to work together to fight the epidemic. With the opening of border, we can kickstart the economy. That is a key to reboot the economy. We need to reopen communication and traveling with the mainland. Thank you, Secretary. Mr. Yu Si-wing, 3 minutes. Chairman, I'm also concerned about the health code. The tourist sector also wants borders to be reopened. However, the messages we are sending is confused about the capacity of public sector and private sector testing. What is the maximum capacity after reopening the border, when we can reopen the border on a long-term basis? What is the capacity we can provide for Hong Kong people, and what about the prices? I was told by the private sectors that if we don't have a large capacity, then the price must be high. So what is the relation? So is the government aware of the relationship between a lower price and the capacity of testing? We had a green local tour fund providing subsidies for tour guides and escorts. Now, these subsidies will end soon. We don't know when, if travel can resume by the end of this year. The tourist sectors do not benefit much from the subsidies. So by the end of the year, when travel resumes, can you promise that we can benefit from these subsidies? Professor Chen? Chair, on nucleic test, there are two parts. On the public sector's side, the HA has been providing 7,000 tests each day. The HKU and CUHK have also received subsidies from the resources from the government to ramp up the capacity. For the purposes of prevention and combating of the epidemic. The second part is private sector testing. Before and after the third wave, we have purchased testing capacity from the private sector for specified groups in the number of 10 of thousands. The price is as low as $700 per test. Mr. Yu was right. We need to keep an eye on the capacity. When we reopen the border and more people need tests, then I think there will be price adjustments in the market. In the private sector, we have more laboratories joining in to provide tests. Mr. Chen? Mr. Yu was right. For tourist sectors, we have the green local tour and subsidies for tour guide. The application deadline will be the end of this year. We will keep close watch on the situation of the sector. We would engage the sector to see whether we can extend the plan. Next round, next speaker, Mr. Holden Zhao, the first round. Thank you, Chair. Several questions. Now, for instructors providing interest classes in schools, in primary and secondary schools, they will be entitled to subsidies. We have been approached by instructors in schools as well. It seems that kindergarten instructor has been left out. There are also instructors providing trainings and classes for students in kindergarten. It seems that they have been left out. So that's my first question, whether they can be covered. And recently, some school instructors told us that there are different handlings of the matters in different schools. For some schools, during the school suspension period, there were online teaching, and instructors could provide classes via online platform. So the instructors had some earnings. The Education Bureau has provided subsidies to school. So through online teaching, the instructors had some earnings. That's the case for some schools. However, other schools did not do that. Now we have the Anti-Epidemic Fund 3.0. Would the administration urge schools to conduct additional online classes? The instructors are prepared. So besides face-to-face teaching, if we have more online classes, the instructors will be entitled to some earnings. The schools have got the funding already. The instructors' earning have been very low for the past period of time, and they have been suffering for a long time. and also about the frontline artists and art practitioners. Now, the administration will issue subsidies to those registered under the Hong Kong Chinese Artists Association, Baohuo. That will help a little. However, as we have told the secretaries many times, many artists are not full-time workers, so many of them are not registered under an association. So can subsidies be given to them if they can provide a proof of work? They are very needy. They are a very needy class. They need to be helped. So 3 questions, Secretary. The first questions, I invite Mr. Kevin Young to address that, and then Mr. Caspar Choi. Ms. Choi? Chairman, about the instructors of kindergartens. For secondary school students, we encourage all-encompassing learning. Extra-curriculum activities is a part of them. However, for kindergarten students, they are at a young age. So we don't encourage specific trainings for kindergarten students. Like the member said, many instructors are also providing classes for secondary and primary schools. So most of the instructors have been covered in our plan. We don't have a specific program for instructors in kindergartens. For different schools, they handled arrangements with instructors differently. It depends on the needs of the schools and also the practice of the schools. We will step up communication with schools. We have already set aside the resources for the schools. We want the resources to be spent wisely as well. Mr. Caspar Choi. For artists, there are helps provided to the sector, which provide services for concerts. In this month, we have already opened up venues for application. Actually, in October, we have been selling tickets for venues for activities to be carried out. Our next speaker, Mr. Lau Kwok Fan, the first round. Good morning, Secretary. For handouts and subsidies, the application procedures are very complicated. For example, the $4,000 handout. And also, they are not focused. Last week, many members asked about the ESS. For supermarkets and property management companies, they were not suffering a loss from the epidemic. However, they still receive help. After the first round, they pocketed the money. So now we know that there's a problem. Instead of asking them to rebate the subsidies to citizens, can we do that in another way? We should stop giving subsidies for them in the second round. In supermarkets, for supermarkets, it seems that people are not happy with their plan. I've heard that on the radio this morning. So can we simply stop giving them subsidies? Secretary for Labour and Welfare, Dr. Law. This question has been answered in the past. during the second round of the Anti-Epidemic Fund. It depends on the operation situation of the employers. We had a dozen of tens of thousands of them. We need to consider how many employees they had. And also, if we need to do a lot of vetting, then it may take a lot of time, like half a year. So we need to strike a balance to help more employers. I understand that. However, the procedures are either too stringent or too relaxed. We have had the first round. So usually you would review the policy and see whether we should stop giving subsidies to some employers. Now, there are many voices calling for the stop of giving subsidies to these employers. For some smaller property management company, they are not even willing to rebate 80% of the subsidies they receive. For smaller property management company, the subsidies they receive is even greater than 1 or 2 years' profits. So they would rather receive the money and close the business rather than rebating the subsidies to property owners. So should we have a mechanism to decide whether to stop giving out subsidies?
我只會去重複嘅。
Dr. Law, any mechanism must be fair and it must be based on the situation of the 100,000 odd employers. If we are to assess all the employers, then that would defeat the purpose of ESS. We applaud the work of our civil service. They have been efficient. We are giving out money like other economies. We have been efficient because money was given out swiftly, but are there ways to be efficient and effective at the same time? I believe in the capabilities of the civil service. Secretary, apparently you are telling us that that is how the civil service works, but that should not be the case. I understand that time is limited, so I might wait for the next round. I will cite examples from other economies, and I want to know why the SAR government can't do it. Dr. Law, basically, we must hold ourselves accountable to the audit, LegCo, and the public. So there are a lot of processes or requirements we must satisfy, and it's not possible to build a system within a month or two. In terms of the caring and sharing scheme, application started after 19 months of preparation. Mr. Lau, 4 minutes. Secretaries, a lot of lawmakers call for the government to give out retail coupons. And in theory, they would spend the money they receive on making purchases, and the government cited administrative procedures. Under the epidemic, Macau introduced retail coupons, and they are at their second phase already. In phase 1, they gave out $3,000 of coupons and $5,000 for phase 2. And applicants would be given something like an octopus card, and the cap is $300 per purchase. That way, people could shop in different places, for instance, catering, retail, etc. From announcement of the program to application to people receiving the card, it took only about 2 months. Of course, Macau has a much smaller population than Hong Kong, but they had to go through more or less the same procedures. Chief Secretary, would you learn from successful examples at other economies? I think it's normal for different governments to learn from each other. Can Hong Kong introduce retail coupons in this manner? Of course, we are happy to look at successful cases, and Macau is one of them. Like you said, we would find out why they managed to put this in place so efficiently. As for the retail coupons, we have said that we would do whatever we could. ESS represents substantial cost for the government, but indeed it is useful in reducing unemployment. Of course, it is not perfect. We wanted to make the scheme more straightforward, so there's certainly room for improvement. And having said that, we are constantly learning and constantly making adjustments. The CS said he would look into the situation. I'm happy to share details of the retail coupons given out by the Macau government. There's still some time till the policy address is given out or delivered. The government should offer at least $5,000 in retail coupons in order to stimulate the economy. Can the CS promise that? We are happy to receive further information from you. We will be collecting views and consider what is viable for Hong Kong. Mr. Wong Ting Kwong, first round, 5 minutes. Thank you. In recent years, the government has done a lot of things that were well-intentioned but did not end up well. We have seen a few rounds of the AEF. But you have not thought over the program very well. In terms of the employment support scheme, we should be supporting enterprises who were affected by the epidemics. Those who weren't don't require any help. Some people had their jobs affected because of the epidemic, and those are people you need to help. Or the people who are not affected don't need any support from you. The government said a lot of resources are needed to carry out assessments on everyone, but that exactly is your job. Well, if the same goes for my company, I would be gone. That is not the way to do it. Mr. Wang, please use parliamentary language at LegCo. I think the government has done a very poor job. During the epidemic, supermarkets and property management companies never saw their businesses affected. Supermarkets were earning even more. The property management companies continue to operate, and the owners continue to pay their management fees. These companies were never affected by the epidemic. Their revenues were not affected. Their business was never affected. On the other hand, for those in the cross-boundary operations, their revenue or income has been affected. For the performers and performance artists, since all the events and operations were called off, they had no income. Apparently, the government is dodging the difficult tasks. For people who were hit hardest, nothing has been done for them. Chief Secretary, I'd like to know what you are going to do going forward in terms of helping people who were left out. In terms of this funding proposal, there's no way the DAB or indeed myself would oppose the item, but we are frustrated and unhappy about the government's policy making. I hope the government would face up to people's difficulties. You should not come up with delusional plans that would satisfy nobody. Chief Secretary, thank you very much for the reminder. We would certainly strive to do even better. Of course, sometimes there would be deficiencies in our work, and we would try to rectify them as much as we can. But indeed, we are now facing a dilemma. We understand the plight of the people and enterprises, but since we are, or our public resources are stretched, we are facing an unprecedented deficit of more than $300 billion, and the future is full of uncertainties. Of course, we must take care of the people and enterprises in the meantime. So I hope everyone would understand our situation. Mr. Charles Mok, speaking for a second time, 4 minutes. I'd like to talk about enclosure D. The government intends to provide support to tens of thousands of Hong Kong residents in Guangdong province to help deliver medications to them. And they also propose to provide consultation for these patients at the HKU Shenzhen Hospital. There are concerns about personal data and the sharing of medical records. I read some reports on these. I wonder whether the medical records would be shared through the electronic medical record system or the CMS system of the hospital authority. If it is the CMS, perhaps you need to obtain patient consent, or you might need to consult the privacy commissioner. But if we are using the electronic system, then the procedures would be bounded by the law. This involves not just data in the public domain or in the government, but also information stored among private practitioners. 5 or 6 years ago, at the Bills Committee discussions, we talked about a lot of these questions. At that time, our understanding was that the requirements were strict. That is, the practitioners could not access the patient's record if he or she is not in Hong Kong. So legally speaking, have you conducted any assessment to see whether the work complies with the relevant electronic health record system ordinance, and would any adjustments to the ordinance be warranted? If the design of this system never considered access to such information from outside Hong Kong, have you carried out any security or technical assessments on whether such access is possible? With this system in place, does it mean Shenzhen Hospital can access all the medical records of Hong Kong people, or is it limited to only to those who participate in the scheme? Do you need some kind of segregation between the systems?
Dr. Ko and then the Undersecretary of the INT Bureau. Dr. Ko, please. Thank you, Chair. About the operational arrangements, to put it briefly, the special assistance scheme is for patients under the hospital authority. Of course, if there are medical records, it would facilitate their medical follow-up. The patients gets to choose whether their medical record will be shared. We do not plan to share the medical record via the CMS, nor sharing the medical record via the electronic medical record system. So there will be no sharing of personal data. For legal issues and other practical issues, we will look into it with the Hong Kong Shenzhen Hospital. If a patient would like to get their medical record, they can make an application with the Office of the eHealth, and then the medical record will be downloaded on an encrypted file, which will be passed on to the patients. So it will be the patients who take initiative to get their medical record. Is there anything to supplement? Please be brief. If that's the case, it seems that you are trying to bypass the requirements under the law. Before implementation, you need to come to LegCo and give us more information about it. What you are suggesting now is against the intention of the law. You use the CHR to download the file to the patient and ask the patient to bring it with him. This is problematic. I think the administration has heard you. The next round, Mr. Xiu Gajun, the third round, 3 minutes. Last month today, in the House Committee, I requested Mr. Kaspar Choi, the Secretary of the HAB, to meet with the stakeholders on the 8th of September. The Secretary met with those art and cultural practitioners. Now, in the third round of AEF, artists and cultural freelance practitioners will be offered $5,000 one-off subsidy, which will benefit 4,100 people. And also, the tenants of the Creative Arts Center will receive 75% rent concession for 6 months. Well, these are better than nothing. However, for freelance art and cultural practitioners, there are no sustaining subsidy. The scope is narrow, and it does not address the needs. There are bipartisan calls for the unemployment assistance, and also there are a lot of suggestions on how to help those in the arts and cultural sectors. This is a consensus across the parties. However, the administration is still paying no heed. Is it really so hard to verify the practitioner's identity? Will the administration extend the rent concession for art venues, and also give subsidies to the rent? And also, will there be waiving of ticketing, administrative costs, and also other subsidies to plug the gaps? Mr. Caspar Choi. I thank Mr. Siu for inviting us to engage with the artists and cultural sector practitioners in the House meeting. We have heard Mr. Siu's suggestions. Another concern was when the performances can be reopened. So under the AEF, we have set aside $1.5 billion to help the cultural practitioners. And also, we have dispersed $124 million to more than 160 art groups. We have had the help of the ADC in considering whether the conditions can be relaxed. We will continue to engage the sector to see how we can benefit more. But the focus last time was how we can reopen the venues to receive audience. So now, as I said, we have reopened the venues. We hope we can have performance starting October. If the situation of the epidemic continue to ease, we can have more relaxation. Next, Mr. Wu Ji-wai, 3 minutes. In my last round, I asked about the strategies adopted in the previous 2 rounds. Actually, the premises was that the situation would be under control in a short period of time. That's why we had the ESS. Through the ESS, the employer can retain their employees. That's the premises. However, given the situation now, we are talking about the end of 2021 when we will have the vaccines. If the situation keeps fluctuating, we may need to change our strategy. Under AEF 2.0, 11,000 employers had applied for ESS, but then they stopped applying. So for unemployment and underemployment, we are talking about 11 or 12% of our working force who are unemployed or underemployed. The figure is going to rise. We are calling for a new strategy. In the previous rounds, we expected employers to stay in operation and help the governments to retain jobs. Now we have to take a new direction. The first problem is the unemployment and underemployment rate is going to rise. That's why we are calling for the special allowance for the unemployed. On Saturday, Dr. Law was asked why the governments didn't do that on the radio. Dr. Law said, once we had the special allowance for unemployed, it would become a recurrent measures or a long-term measure. Why? Did you have a crystal ball? Why did you say that when we had the special allowance, it will become a long-term policy? Nobody is asking about that. Is asking for that. No employers would like to ask for money on a long-term basis. And also, there are employers who opt out of the employment support scheme and leave the economy for good. So how can we deal with that? We need to decouple the policy and have two policies to tackle them. Dr. Law? In 2008, when we had the financial tsunami, we had a 3% rise of unemployment. It was only until 2017 when the unemployment rate dropped below 3%. So we know that the unemployment situation will sustain. And this time, the impact is much larger than the 2008 situation. Mr. Wu, you may have to wait for the next round. Mr. Andrew 1, 3 minutes. Actually, my colleagues have asked the same question. However, the answers were not satisfactory. Now, you said the CSSA would be threshold will be relaxed. There are bipartisan calls for relaxation of the CSSA. You said you would consider that. Mr. Leung Chi-Chang suggested last time that you should revisit the situation of applying for CSSA on an individual basis. Now you said you have relaxed some conditions. However, there are blind spots. There may be some who are unemployed in the family, not all of them. So how can we help these people? You said you would think about it afterwards. We talk about food bank, about the 8 weeks upper limits. I know it is flexible. However, can you remove these caps? And also working allowance, the 144 hours of work requirements. Now people don't have to work as much. So these are actually administrative measures. You can simply remove them. Why can't you promise to remove them? This is very easy. Dr. Law? I have answered this question a few times. In our welfare system, we use family as base unit. If we single out individuals, it will affect the welfare system and also the policy of a family-based approach. So this is not just a very simple change. About the working hours limits or requirements under the working allowance, we will revisit that. However, we have tens of thousands of applicants. If there are any changes, we need to update the system to deal with that. And these will require long time. Mr. Andrew 1, of course, I'm not satisfied. Maybe Dr. Law is right. These are suggestions under dire situation. If the government agrees to our suggestion of an unemployment assistance, it can solve it. Now we have no choice but to follow your logic and talk about how to relax the system. However, when we talk about the specifics, he's telling us that these are all unchangeable. So like we said, the government is saving business, but not the people. Can the administration give people more faith? After the last meeting, we were told by many people that they were not being helped at all. For those we can make for those administrative measures we can change, we will look into that. And next, Mr. Kenneth Leung, 3 minutes. Enclosure A7. There are subsidies to the aviation industry, totaling $45 million. For large aircraft and small aircraft, each one will be given $500,000 and $100,000 subsidy. Now, Cathay and the wholly owned subsidiaries of Cathay will not be benefited. So what's the definition of wholly owned subsidiary? Does it have to be owned 100% by Cathay? Are there non-wholly owned subsidiaries under Cathay? And I'm very disappointed that the chief executive of Cathay said despite the $25 billion injection a few months ago, there is likely to be a large-scale layoff. By making an injection into Cathay, of course, the government was trying to retain jobs. So it seems that the goal was not achieved. So what is the financial situation of Cathay? When will the government tell us what's the return generated by the injection of funding?
In the next 12 months, would you inject funds again? If that's the case, you might do it through the land endowment scheme, which does not require our approval. And in that case, we would have no say on that. Hopefully, you can answer these questions. Mr. Frank Chan, please. Chairman. Mr. Leung mentioned the subsidies on aircrafts based on the size of the aircrafts. As for the question of wholly owned subsidiaries, Hong Kong has a limited number of airlines, including Cathay Pacific, Cathay Dragon, Hong Kong Express, etc. Like I explained yesterday, the capital injection by the government on Cathay was to maintain the status of Hong Kong as an aviation hub, and there would be returns from Cathay. In the investment agreement, were there any clauses to protect employees or retain employment? Like the government said earlier, please speak into the microphone, Mr. Chan. We are not hearing you. Chairman, the government made it clear earlier that the injection exercise was to maintain Hong Kong's status as an aviation hub. The daily operation is still managed by Cathay Pacific. Time's up. So, Mr. Leung, you might have to wait for the next round. Mr. Tony Chair, speaking for the third time, 3 minutes. The epidemic certainly affects many sectors, many of which require government support. I have said that in terms of financial and policy backing by the government, work needs to be done swiftly. Some people complain about the financial support and the sectors to be benefited, but I still believe that the more we can do, the better. For the sector I represent, or the construction industry, they have not directly benefited from the measures. Chief Secretary, as you know, the unemployment rate in the construction industry is about 11.3%, or about double of the overall employment rate. But the many people in the industry just want a job. Chairman, yourself and Mr. Chen Kim-po have overseen the approval of AEF proposals, and we have approved $170 billion so far. With the approval of the funds, we hope the government would provide its support measures as soon as possible. That way, many projects can proceed to tendering as soon as possible, and you must support the SMEs. We suggest allowing SMEs to take part in at least 30% of the projects. That way, people can retain their jobs. For AEF 2.0, we talked about conducting inspections for some 20,000 buildings. Would the government consider inspecting even more buildings? Would you consider providing further support to these buildings if necessary? Mr. Liu, Undersecretary. Thank you very much. In terms of the works with approval from the Finance Committee, we would implement the projects as soon as possible. Of the $100 billion granted last year, we have granted at least half the works. For the remainder, we are either receiving or vetting the tenders. As for building inspection, we would consider whether more could be done. Thank you very much. Professor Joseph Lee, 4 minutes. Half the questions I asked last week have not been answered. I asked about the use of funds by the HA. Dr. Koh said in the first round there was $4.7 billion, about $2 billion remained, and this time they are receiving a fresh allocation, and a few $100 million are allocated for frontline staff. I put this question to the CS last time, but no answer was given. Under the COVID epidemic, the frontline staff have been working very hard, and the future is full of uncertainties, and the winter flu surge is coming. Our frontline staff are working extremely hard to fight the epidemic. The HA has decided to freeze pay in line with the government. In August, we took part in a petition with the Nursing Association, and a survey found that 120,000 people found that pay should not be frozen by frontline staff, and on the other hand, bonuses should be given to boost morale. You did not answer my question. In the first round of AEF, about $2 billion remain. You are allocating fresh funds for the HA, but according to enclosure A1, about $400 million would be assigned to frontline staff, but you did not explain how the money would be used. Given the public sentiments, Chief Secretary, would you urge the HA or FHB to allocate part of this money for subsidies, for staff? That way you can boost the morale of the frontline staff. CS, would you promise to do that since money is available? And this is true, especially when we don't know when the epidemic would end. Chief Secretary, thank you very much. All medical professionals, including frontline staff, have been doing all their best, especially those who have strived to work hard. Part of the money would be used as staff subsidies, and those involved in fighting the epidemic would receive up to $500 daily in subsidy, and we would let the HA decide how to use the funds. The purpose of the $4.7 billion allocation is to enhance the epidemic control capacity, including hardware and software. So we certainly would respect the decision of the HA board. CS, you decided to freeze pay. Would you offer a special bonus or subsidy for staff so that you can boost their morale? The FHB and Professor Chan would consider such viability. The pay freeze, as you know, apply to government departments as well as many subvented bodies. Mr. Tommy Chang, 3 minutes. I would be very quick, Chairman. First of all, a few months ago, we angled for an $80,000 subsidy for mailbox providers in schools, but some of them are yet to receive their subsidy. In phase 1, the FEHD did a very good job and the money arrived swiftly. In the second round, since vetting was needed, many companies were assessed for their performance from phase 1. Many had to take out loans in order to pay salaries for August. CS, I know that you have been working hard and your work has been efficient. For the third round of AEF, the catering industry has been making certain calls in recent months. So under the lift and suppress or suppress and lift strategy, I hope our trade would not suffer too much. The financial support to the industry has been dwindling. We have no objections towards most social distancing measures, such as the separation between tables of 1.5 meter. I hope the headcount limit would be relaxed to 4 people for certain premises, such as karaoke lounges, from 6 to 6. In terms of fighting the epidemic and allowing businesses to operate, we should strike a balance. Last week, I met the FHB and Innovation and Technology Bureau. In terms of equipment like air purifiers, well, this is not a case of collusion. While I do not want to see people buying such equipment if they cannot help fight the epidemic. In terms of electronic payment, the catering industry is certainly interested. But if customers are unwilling to use such system, then we will be in deep trouble. So how do you encourage older people like us to use electronic payment? You can organize a lucky draw or sweepstakes. That way, people would have the incentive to use the system. Mr. Chang offered a lot of views and questions. Perhaps you can wait for the next round so they can offer a reply.
Next, Mr. Lam checked in, third round, 3 minutes. In my last 2 rounds, I asked Dr. Law about the first tranche of ESS. I strongly objected the administration giving over $100 million to the property management company and cleaning companies. In the end, they gained $1 billion profit. The property management companies have been making a huge profit under the COVID. This is not satisfactory. In the second tranche, for those companies with more than 100 employees, they are required to rebate 80% of their subsidies to the owners. Of course, I support that. But the definition for large company is more than 1,000 employees. What about those with 900 employees? The median security officer's salary is $14,000. So half a month's pay means $7,000 times 3. It means $21,000. For companies with 900 employees, there will be $20 million worth of profit. So what about a company with 999 employees? They will be given $10 million of profits. We're talking about those cleaning companies and maintenance companies for lifts. They are not affected under the COVID because the management fees have not been reduced under the epidemic. Dr. Law, why are you giving public money to these companies? It is not in line with the principle of reasonable public policies. Like my previous answers to Mr. Lam, in the second tranche, we have been focusing on companies of larger scale, so we need to draw a line. Maybe the member thinks 900 should be where we draw the line. Some may think 700 is more appropriate, but it's a problem of drawing line. Let's look at it from common sense. A company hiring 900 employees, is it large or small? Is it reasonable for you to give them $20 to $30 million worth of profits? There are scores of these companies. You are repeating the mistake in the first tranche. You are giving them $1 billion profits from the public money, and the share price are soaring. Those are people's money. Is that reasonable, Dr. Law? For smaller companies, you want to avoid the administration costs, then I understand. But what about those companies with 900 employees? Still, you are giving them a lot of profit. We need to handle cases. A lot of cases. There are hundreds of thousands of employers. We cannot finish that kind of work in a few months. You cannot draw a line in a few months. You are supposed to be a professor. Maybe you wait for your next round. Next, Dr. Helena Wong, 3 minutes. It is only natural for us to be angry because many citizens are. The government has been spending public money very unwisely. Like Mr. Lam's examples, for supermarkets, many people are curious why they still receive money. They have been making a huge profit. For markets, not under FEHD's purview, they have been making a lot of money because there are a lot of subsidies. Actually, they don't need them. The property developers told us they have been extending their business under the COVID, buying shops because they receive subsidies from the governments. This is why people are angry, but we receive no answers. Now, I would like to follow up on vaccines. 8.4 billion have been set aside for procuring vaccines for COVID. So in this amount, will all Hong Kong people be given a free dose? And also, is it voluntary? Is it compulsory for everyone to receive a dose? When we have the vaccines, will we have priority in who will receive the vaccine first? And also, how many kinds of vaccines will there be? Will we only have vaccines from China? Will we have more vaccines to spread out the risk? And does citizens get to choose? Can they make an informed choice? If they cannot choose what kind of vaccines, how will you decide which kind of vaccines you give the people? Professor Chen. Chair, I will take the question and then Director for Health will supplement. In procuring vaccines, we have taken a two-pronged approach. We have the COVAX facility, which will provide 35%, which will provide vaccines covering 35% of our citizens. You do not have to repeat. Will there be compulsory vaccination and will they be free? The scientific committee have signed non-disclosure agreements with different manufacturers. That is for getting more data to assess the situation of those vaccines under the third stage of trial. The experts will analyze the data. Now we want to procure at least 2 types of vaccines under the advanced purchase agreements. They are from different providers and manufacturers. Whether all Hong Kong citizens will receive a dosage, well, the number of doses will be adequate for 2 times of Hong Kong's population. We need to make that preparation because we don't know the results of those third stage candidates. So that's the usual practices in foreign countries as well. Director for Health, please. Ms. Chen, will the vaccines be free of charge? Chairman, we will make reference to the previous subsidies scheme in the administration of the vaccines. There are 4 platforms globally, so we have made reference to the experts' advice, and we would procure vaccines from at least 2 platforms. It is on a voluntary basis. She mentioned that the existing subsidizing scheme will be made reference to. Next, Dr. Zhang Chongtai. About you spending $100 million to subsidize the Hong Kong Shenzhen Hospital to provide services to Hong Kongers. We have no way to monitor how they spend the money. The Secretary said they will adopt the Yantian residential elderly care home system. However, the nature is different. Under that scheme, every Hong Kongers will be given an amount to enjoy the service. However, this is a different system for Hong Kong Shenzhen Hospital. You said there will be $2,000 for each patient. However, what about the leftover? Will the leftover be returned to us? No, I don't think so. And also, I think all the amounts will be used up because they will try to make up the amount. However, I will stop pressing about that. About vaccines, the COVAX facility under WHO, while many advanced economies said they would not join, for example, Germany, France, they won't join. So why does the Hong Kong government still decide to join this COVAX facility? Now we have a 2-pronged approach. You would procure vaccines from private providers, and also with the WHO scheme, 35% will be guaranteed. So these vaccines will be of different brands with different composition. If that's the case, how will you deal with them? Now for WHO, those countries buying from WHO, those are less advanced economies. So will there be two queues? Have you considered the difference in quality of vaccines from the two platforms? Dr. Zhang, in the decision to enroll in COVAX, first, this is an international body, and also WHO is also involved. The scientific committee under the Department of Health have decided to enroll in this facility. Chair, that's my question. Many countries chose to procure vaccines themselves rather than trusting the facility. And also about the handling of the vaccines, that's a political issue, very important. Professor Chen, I think you have heard his view. Public health has nothing to do with political views. Vaccines is entirely a public health issue with no political elements. I think we have our different views. And next, Mr. Ben Chen, 3 minutes. So Dr. Zhang is taking politics into vaccines. This is very strange. Maybe politics has been vaccinated into him so that he's taking a political stance in everything. This is very ridiculous. This is shameful and laughable. Now, the Transport and Housing Bureau has not answered me on the question of cross-boundary transports like buses and limousines. The drivers have not been working under this time. Some are covered by the ESS, some are not. So for non-franchised bus and hired vehicles, there are subsidies. But I would like to focus on cross-boundary vehicles. They are paying double insurance fees and double inspection fees. Because of the closure of borders, these vehicles are stranded. The government should make special considerations in giving subsidies for these vehicles. They are all categorized under non-franchised buses. There are actually many types of non-franchised buses. Some are still up and running, but for cross-boundary vehicles, they have stopped operation because of the closure of borders. Why can't there be separate consideration for them? Mr. Frank Cheng? Chair, can you hear me? Concerning cross-boundary logistics industry, we have regular communications with them. For cross-boundary hired vehicles and buses, we have cash subsidies for them in this round. For the drivers, under the ESS, for those self-employed drivers with an MPF account, they will be given subsidies. For commercial vehicles, we have waived the licensing fees and registration fees. The government has actually done a lot in terms of facilitating movements across the border. For example, every nucleic test for the drivers every 2 days, funded by the government. This is in order to ensure that the goods necessary for daily life can be maintained. For drivers traveling between Guangdong and Hong Kong, we have been liaising with the Guangdong administration in terms of their quarantine arrangements. I understand that the government, the member was asking for financial subsidies. However, besides financially, the government has done a lot to help the SMEs and the drivers.
係張超雄議
Next, Dr. Fernando Chang, 2 minutes. Chairman, the government is constantly subsidizing the big guns, but they refuse to sponsor the food bank for 4 more weeks. And last week they have been talking about special circumstances. Today, Mr. Lam Ching Choi, EXCO member and chairman of the Elderly Commission, said that the epidemic has revealed the ugliest side of the society, and we must face up to this ugly side and change inappropriate policies. And he was referring to issues with the LCHE, such as cramped environment, lack of infection control, lack of ventilation, manpower shortage, and staff having to work across different residential care homes. In the epidemic, 30 elderly residents have passed away. We are at the 3rd round of the AEF, amounting to more than $300 billion. How much resources are invested to improve the environment of such care homes and to reinforce manpower? Mr. Lam Ching Choi just mentioned a lot of deficiencies. How much money would be spent in this regard? Chief Secretary, LCHEs are a key area for us. For LCHEs and LCHDs, staff and carers were tested, and we are stepping up the testing frequency because they are at high risk. We carry out tests at the care homes for them. We also applied special coating. You carried out 2 rounds of testing. You said tests would be carried out every 14 days. How much money would you invest in this? Secretary, Dr. Law, Secretary, Chairman, I have no specific numbers on hand. The first round of testing costs some $20 million. The second round was a little different from the first round. Self-sampling was adopted. The cost was about $100 million. We are at the 3rd round of testing, and it should be completed in a day or 2. The second round costs more than $100 million. Apologies, the second round costs more than $10 million, but I have no specific figures. Ms. Elvin Yang, 2 minutes. First of all, a question for the Assistant Director. I asked about the number of beneficiaries who receive consultation at the HKU Shenzhen Hospital, but according to paragraph 5, the target or base was 28,000 patients. Why can't you tell us the number of patients that would benefit instead of the number of visits? Dr. Law. Medications would be given in the scheduled consultation sessions. That would take place every 3 to 6 months normally. The number of beneficiaries would be similar to the number of visits. There is no IT system to record every single visit, so we cannot provide the number of patients or beneficiaries. Dr. Ko said the cost is about $450 per visit, and the total cost is about $28,000 after 5 visits, and you are now asking for more than $100 million. Why is there such a big difference in the amount you are asking for? Dr. Ko. The numbers I cited were rough estimates. The situation might be different for different specialties, and the number of scheduled sessions might also be different. We hope to provide enough support to all 38,000 patients. Even if I multiply that by $2,250, the total is only $85 million. Are you providing for contingencies? The numbers we shared were just rough estimates. As for the actual cost of the scheduled sessions, it would depend on the frequency and specialty. Mr. Yang, please switch on the microphone for Mr. Yang. If at the end there is leftover money, what would happen to the funds? Would it be returned to the Treasury? The subsidy would be given on a reimbursement basis. Mr. Vincent Chang speaking for the fourth round. 2 minutes. I'd like to ask about the mice industry. I've been following up with Wong Ting Kwong on this sector. Events like the book fair has been consistently postponed. For those in the performing industry, many of them have lost income and they have switched jobs. Earlier, the government allocated $1 billion to promote the mice industry, but many people are now out of the industry. I understand that the fund is yet to be spent, so can part of it be spent to help the practitioners? That way they can still survive in the industry. Who can take this question? Dr. Bernard Chan, Undersecretary. As for the mice support scheme, we announced last week that part of the scheme would be reactivated on the 3rd of August or October. For those wanting to organize events at AWE or HACC, we would fully subsidize the venue costs. We hope the mice practitioners can survive in this manner. I have met Dr. Chen earlier, and you asked for the thousands of workers to apply for subsidy, and they are still in deep plight. Apart from supported the mice industry, can you also help the practitioners? Like the CS said yesterday, in terms of identifying people who need help, this is a rather difficult task, but we will continue to take in views and we are happy to receive proposals. Mr. Roy Kwong, 3 minutes. On the 24th of April, the ODN reported suspension of the Express Rail link, and there were news that the taxpayers had to spend at least $200 million to fill the void. That was in April. According to the concession agreement, if the passenger volume falls below 15% of the target, the KCRC would have to bear 85% of the losses. Since August, there has been 0 passengers at the XRL. How much money has the XRL lost so far? I hope the government can promise not to use taxpayers' money to fill this void. Is there any update from the government? Mr. Frank Chan. Please speak into the microphone. Thank you. I would try to speak up. In terms of the operation of XRL, service has been suspended for a long time due to the epidemic. We understand that the MTRC and KCRC has signed an operation agreement. So in terms of the XRL operation, passenger arrangement, etc., this is a commercial agreement. Some members asked about the agreement, and we have said that since the agreement is commercially sensitive, details could not be disclosed. If the passenger volume falls below the allowed minimum, how would this be dealt with by the different parties? This is something to be resolved between the NERC and KCLC. Chairman, they refuse to tell us how much money is lost, and they would not promise not to use taxpayers' money to fill the void. We don't even know what happened since April. The XRL has seen 0 passengers. Well, you have successfully implemented the XRL project. We are asking for the number because we don't want to be filling a financial void in the future. Secretary, I just want to know the number or sum. You cannot ask us to fill the void all of a sudden, let's say $1 billion. This is something that has to do with public funds. Mr. Chan, I'm sure we all realize that no one could have seen the epidemic coming. So I hope everyone would understand the current situation. I have no other thing to add. Mr. Yu Siweng, 2 minutes. In terms of the RNA tests, the public testing capacity is 7,000 per day, and no figure was given for in terms of the private capacity. I hope borders will be open as soon as possible, especially with the mainland and Macau, since there is substantial demand. What is the potential public testing capacity and private testing capacity? My concern is that the testing capacity would affect people's intention to travel. So I'd like to see some figures from the Secretary. Mr. Chan, Professor Sophia Chan. In terms of public testing capacity, it is now at 7,000 or above. Like we said, if we see further outbreaks, since the private testing capacity is now substantial and many private laboratories have joined, if necessary, we can procure private service in the future. Currently, testing for targeted groups is carried out by private institutions, and the government would procure private testing capacity. As for private testing capacity for people who wish to travel, we understand the capacity is in dozens of thousands. All along, we have been communicating with private laboratories, and if needed, they can further expand their capacity. Chairman, I hope the government can provide relevant numbers. That is, at different stages, what would be the RNA testing capacities? Professor Chan. At this stage, we have requested data to be provided by private labs, but from past experience, they can expand their testing capacity when needed. The numbers they provide at this stage might not fully reflect future capacity, but if necessary, we are happy to provide the information. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, 2 minutes. Dr. Law talked about the 2008 financial tsunami, and it took 8 to 9 years to revive the economy. And this shows that unemployment will continue to plague Hong Kong and our economy. If the 9,000 unemployment assistance is given to 6 months, it would come to 54,000. And for 10 years, this would cost $5.4 billion. If you see unemployment persisting for quite some time, but you are refusing to even think about a temporary unemployment assistance, you have closed the doors. Are you holding yourselves accountable to those who are unemployed? You are saying that people can apply for the special unemployment assistance under CSSA. You said the special scheme would be extended by 6 months, and you are making it sound like you have been very generous. Do you know what you are talking about? This shows that the government is simply trying to revive the economy with no regards to the people. You are refusing to provide a temporary assistance at all.
Dr. Law, Chair, for special allowance without means testing, the government would not consider it. In improving the long-term unemployment benefits, we need to think about offsetting and long-term service payment and so on. Don't digress. You are not directly addressing the issue. You close the door. Please switch on Mr. Wu's microphone. Please get your priorities straight. If you have a plan to help 100,000 unemployed or underemployed and spending 10 billions on them, I think it is very reasonable. We have the resource. We should focus on helping those needy people. What's wrong with that? I think Dr. Law has heard your opinions. Mr. Andrew Wan, the fourth round, 2 minutes. Thank you, Chair. For our suggestions on how to improve the government's alleviation measures, they are not paying any heed. We are disappointed. The government is not being fair in the plans. For ESS, some sectors have been benefited by the schemes, and the government is asking supermarkets to give rebates to the customers. For shops under major property developers, they are hard hit. There's a survey. The 5 developers, Hutchison, Vanguard, and other developers, they have not been helping the tenants. They have made a few months rent concession, and then that's it. And the developer is giving rent concession. However, they are asking the tenants to extend their contract as a condition. They are the one benefited under the COVID. So how can you hold them to account and ask them to help the people? CS. This is concerning employment, so I will invite Dr. Law to answer the question. In the second tranche of ESS, there was an additional condition for employers newly applying the scheme. If they did anything that caused other employers failing to fulfill the conditions of the ESS, the government would claw back the subsidies. This is not just about the condition of the scheme. It is about whether you are willing to negotiate with the developers, whether you have the will to do it. Will you ask the property owners to to not bring the tenants down with them, because that would not do anyone good. Actually, the CE has met with the property developers and urged them for help. So we have been communicating with the developers. Some have responded, but some did not. That's the challenges we are facing. The government is taking the lead as a role model to provide rent concession like the AA and also premises leased under short-term tenancies. We have taken the lead to do that. However, this is a free economy. We cannot force anyone. However, we will not give up on communicating. Next one, Mr. Kenneth Leung, the fourth round, 2 minutes. I would like to ask Mr. Frank Chan about the injection to Cathay. Will you tell us about the performance of the injection and when can you do that? And many members ask about contactless payments method. At different shops. However, I'm more concerned about taxis. We don't have universal contactless payment technology for taxis. Out of different reasons, the taxi industry is very reluctant to install this system. When we take taxis, we need to get we need to have changes, but sometimes the taxi drivers would even say they have bad business and they refuse to give changes as well. So when can we have contactless payments for taxis? Is there a timetable? I think these two questions are for Mr. Frank Chan. One about Cathay and the other one is about contactless payments in taxis. Chair, the Transport and Housing Bureau is responsible for the policies for the transport industry, including aviation. The decision of the injection into Cathay and also the agreement was under the Treasury and Financial Services purview. What about the contactless payments in taxi? In light of the COVID situation, we would study it with the taxi industry to see whether we can install this system more widely, because there are some taxis which have this system already. So, Mr. Christopher Hui, concerning Cathay. Chair, as part of a deal, we would deploy 2 observers to sit in the board of Cathay. So the government will be monitoring the entire agreement. Mr. Leung, supplement. You have to come back to the electrical to tell us about the performance of the 2 observers. You have to tell us what they observed. So can you share with us the progress? Now, Cathay is a listed company, so there are certain disclosure rules they have to comply with. Next, Mr. Shilga Chun, 2 minutes. I would like to follow up on Mr. Kenneth Leung's question about contactless payments in taxis. The Secretary said he would communicate with taxi industry. So has that been done? When will that be done? We want a timetable. Since the Chinese Lunar New Year, we have had the epidemic already. I also use taxi services. However, I have not come across any taxis with contactless payments. I don't know what taxis you are talking about. Maybe I'm just unlucky. And also about tenants in wet markets and small catering businesses. On the 28th of August in the House Committee, I said small restaurants are hard hit, and also the rents have been raised by 50%. The CS said he would urge the landlords not to raise the rent, and also government premises would provide rent concession. And have you, besides urging the landlords to reduce the rents, what other things you have done? Are you waiting for the landlords to become merciful and give rent concessions? I have answered the question. Of course, we have been urging them all along. The CE and myself have been communicating with the property developers. The government has also taken the lead, besides short-term tenancies rent recession, for water charges and also water treatment fees. We have provided concessions and helped a lot of restaurants, and we have raised concession from $1,500 to $5,000. So we have been helping the small businesses comprehensively. So what about the time frame, Mr. Frank Chen? The Housing Authority and the Housing Society has provided rent concession for the non-residential tenements. For Hospital Authority, the amount is about $600 million. For the society, housing society, there is also subsidies. What about the timetable for contactless payments in taxi? Directive for transports, Ms. Law. Chair, we have been following up on the members' suggestion. There are handheld devices for contactless payments in some taxis. We will speed up the progress. With COVID, many citizens would like to pay without having contact. So we would speed up communication with the industry. Ms. Tanya Chan, the third round, 3 minutes. Maybe I was lucky. 3 days ago, I took a taxi with Octopus payments available. I like chatting with taxi drivers. I was told that by the driver that administrative cost has to be charged. And also, usually we would just leave them the tips. However, we need to type in the amounts. We need to key in the amounts for tips. And also, it takes about 10 seconds. But the drivers will not have to give us the change. So maybe that has to do with the administrative cost. Today, I also took a taxi to come here. The driver told me, Ms. Chen, you really have to ask the administration for us. I've been applying for subsidies for 2 months. I haven't received the money yet, and the hotline did not come through. I've been waiting for 2 months, so now I'm asking the question for him. Our office also received complaints of delay in payments, and also the reply given by departments are not swift, and people were just directed to recordings in the hotlines. So have you stepped up the support for applicants in this regard? Ms. Law? Thank you, Chair. Concerning subsidies for taxi drivers, the progress is indeed a bit slow. We need to look up the record and documents, because unlike franchise butts, taxis documents are not as clear. We have doubled up our manpower to speed up the process. So that means from 2 people to 4 people. Is that right? No, we have a double-digit increase in manpower. And also, mothers told us about the subsidies for their children for students. They could not reach anyone via the hotlines. So maybe Mr. Matthew Zhang can see what you can do about that.
Chief Secretary, we would certainly follow up and provide timely support. We would take a break after Mr. Tommy Chang speaks. Other members can speak after the break. Mr. Chang speaking for the fourth time, 2 minutes. I ask questions of the Director of Aviation and Secretary for Education. I believe they will answer my questions. CS, there are a few things the catering industry wants to do to help the government fight the epidemic, and these include electronic payment. If the number of airflow is less than 6 times an hour, then the FEHD can help install ventilators. Nowadays, there are equipment like positive or negative ionizers. Can you tell the trade whether these equipment can help fight the virus? In terms of electronic payment, we had a lengthy discussion with the Innovation and Technology Bureau. We realized that electronic payment is cheaper and it is also effective, but we are concerned that customers might be reluctant to use electronic payment. If the government wants to promote universal use of electronic payment, you can organize sweepstakes so that people can win prizes and be willing to adopt this new payment card. For the first question, I would ask the FHB, FHD, and EMSD to follow up, and they can explore the ventilation and disinfection equipment. Electronic payment is certainly a new culture that should be promoted. We are lagging behind many places, and this requires the collective effort of the government and the public. We are now at the 2-hour mark. We will now take a 10-minute break, and we will resume at 11:13. Thank you.